Iron Fist Season 1 is a fascinating addition to the MCU, not so much in the story department, but in how people are viewing it. The split between the audience score and the critic score on Rotten Tomatoes is perhaps the biggest I've ever seen. So why do critics hate this show so much? Looking through the reviews, I can find 3 key reasons. This was one of my biggest takeaways watching this show. I wholeheartedly agree with this point. Sometimes, it was even comedic in all the worst ways how predictable everything was. There's a point where Joy goes to answer the door, and in my mind all I could think was, she's getting attacked. And guess what happens?
I did not see that coming!
The show's story is extraordinarily by the numbers. Billionaire is thought dead, but returns years later, only having learned special abilities and uses those abilities to become a superhero. I've never seen that story before.
Let's face it, this is not the worst thing you've caught me doing.
Not to mention the coincidences and drop storylines are all a bit much. When telling a story, you have 2 options to make it feel fresh and new. The first and far trickier way is to try to do stuff that hasn't been done before. This keeps the story fresh, but since stories have been being written forever, it's unlikely you can add anything really new to the landscape. The second is to try to throw an original spin on your story. Make it your own. Daredevil is a gritty crime thriller, Jessica Jones is a detective show, Luke Cage draws heavily from the blaxploitation movies of the 1970s. Iron Fist does nothing like that, and because of that, the standard story is incredibly prominent. Both Jessica Jones and Daredevil Season 1 had solid stories behind their storytelling. Iron Fist does not. I completely agree with this criticism, but what actually baffles me is that Luke Cage actually had worse pacing issues. This series is more consistent with its pacing. Luke Cage would jump from exciting to boring episode to episode. I would honestly say the pacing is more of an issue in Luke Cage than it was here. So why is the series panned while Luke Cage is for some reason the best thing in the MCU according to Rotten Tomatoes critics? Well, when Luke Cage had a good episode, it was really good. Here, at best, you could hope for mediocre. Lots of critics seem to think Finn Jones was miscast. This actually baffles me quite a bit. I thought he was fine, he has a spot-on American accent, and since he's supposed to be a guy who's spent most of his life being enlightened and trained by monks, I thought his performance worked well enough. I mean, I have issues with his character, but not really performance-wise. So I wasn't really sure why people seemed to be hating on him. Then I realized what was happening and why critics were coming down on him. It's an issue I don't like to talk about because I think it distracts from things that honestly matter more in quality. But people are making the big deal out of the whitewashing of Iron Fist. Kingpin, Nick Fury, and Human Torch all received race changes in some movie at some point. And people flipped their collective shit. Everyone who flipped their shit was just being ignorant. Michael Clark Duncan was a solid Kingpin. Samuel L. Jackson was born to play Nick Fury. And Michael B. Jordan is an awesome actor in a shit movie.
What are you talking about? This.
But now, people are being ignorant in the exact opposite way about Iron Fist. Comic book Danny Rand is a white guy. Critics are literally complaining that they didn't change his heritage from the source material. So there's no winning. You change the character's race from the comic book, the internet freaks. You keep his race the same, the internet freaks. It's a lose-lose. Honestly, any critic who's freaking out over the fact that they didn't change Danny Rand's race is missing the entire problem with this series. And it has nothing to do with Danny Rand being a white guy. Besides the story, let's just look at the 5 main characters in this series and see if we can pinpoint exactly what's wrong. I don't know what to make of her character. At times she seems good, then at other times she seems nasty.
Jesus.
All I can tell you is that her arc made no goddamn sense this season, and she ended up in a place at the season finale that came out of nowhere.
He must be removed.
Removed.
Killed. I can help you with that.
I'm listening.
Harold seemed like the big villain of the season when he was introduced, but then they give him a tragic backstory and it almost seems like they're going to set him up as a good man who has fallen and become a villain for reasons that are completely understandable and maybe even justified. He's dying of cancer, but the hand gives him the cure. Then it's revealed they didn't cure cancer, but death in general. But every time he dies, he becomes more violent, more evil. Perhaps the evil man we see wasn't the man he was before. But then they reveal he was always an asshole and is the villain who he always seemed to be.
Last time I was up here was with your father. Building wasn't even open yet. We came up here and looked down at New York. We had the world at our feet. We're standing on that little ledge over there. And here's the funny part. I had this overwhelming urge to push Wendell over.
Way to take interesting ideas and flush them down the toilet. Good job, Iron Fist Season 1. Ward easily has the best arc of the series. But my god, he is an insufferable douchebag for most of it. I like how they conclude his character, but you have to go through him being just awful for 10 episodes just to get there. It's a rough ride. And that leaves us with the two main characters who I guess are the most likable, but that's not saying much. Colleen has a multi-episode arc about getting into ultimate fighting that goes nowhere. Danny seems fine, but does apparently throw fits like a child apparently sometimes when things don't go his way. You see, this is the problem with the series. It has nothing to do with Danny Rand's race. It has to do with characters that range from just annoying as shit to maybe sometimes mildly likable, and all of them in a story with no unique character to itself and no originality to it. This show was nice enough, however, to provide an analogy for itself. This show is an aluminum foil throwing star. It might look fine with a casual glance, but with any sort of minor inspection, it's clearly flimsy and completely nonsensical.
Hey, if you like this video, please make sure to hit that like button and go ahead and subscribe. That helps me out a lot. And if you really love this video, consider visiting my Patreon page.